Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Tony Duty, and I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at University of Delaware. We broadcast on the HigherEdLive network, and you can tune into Student Affairs Live Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our guests, but we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsor that makes Student Affairs Live possible. HigherEdLive is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest and my colleague here at University of Delaware, Dr. Brad Walgast. Now, Brad, can you start off by describing your current role here and also share with us what prompted you to study and research the topic of sleep?
Absolutely. Hi, thanks for having me, first of all, by the way.
Sure.
And yeah, it's fun to do a podcast with you in a whole different place, but you're still in the same building as me.
Yeah, don't give away the secret sauce.
Look behind the curtain.
That's right.
So I'm a psychologist, and I'm the director of the counseling center here at the University of Delaware. This is my 11th year at the university, and it's about my 20th year in mental health care of colleges. So I've been working here for quite some time. I became interested in sleep starting when I was a kid because I was born with a deviated septum in the higher part of your nose, your navel, not your navel cavity, but your nasal cavity. And growing up, I was a terrible snorer. And by the time I was in my adolescence and hit puberty, my nickname was Chainsaw, and my brother wouldn't sleep in the same room as me, and I was not a popular sleepover guest. So it wasn't, this was the 1970s and the early 1980s, and at that time in pediatric medicine, sleep apnea and deviated septums were not something that physicians were looking at. So it wasn't noticed by my pediatrician until I was playing basketball late in high school and got hit in the jaw, and went eventually to an ENT, ear, nose, and throat physician, who said, "Your jaw's fine, but how do you breathe through your nose?" And I said, "Well, I never have." So 6 months later, I got that taken care of, and it changed my life from being the student in high school and the son who teachers and my parents were always wondering, "Why are you so lazy? Why are you tired all the time? Why are you sleeping all the time?" And turned me into a student who was doing great in college and had great experiences and could wake up feeling refreshed instead of waking up and thinking about how soon can I take a nap. And from that point on, once I realized what that connection was, I've always been interested in sleep, to the point where in my doctoral program, I was doing research in sleep and writing papers on sleep. And eventually, when I became licensed as a psychologist, I found I could also get board certified in behavior sleep medicine and followed through with that. So I've been board certified in behavior sleep medicine for a few years now, and have spent probably the last 20 years speaking to groups and talking to people clinically and in the grocery store about their sleep and their sleep problems, and trying to help people get better at it. So yeah, that's how I got started.
And helping me over a lunch conversation.
I do more of that than you'd think. It comes up all the time.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I wound up attending one of your presentations here at University of Delaware, and I was blown away at how many people were interested in the topic. Like, you had a standing room only session. Yeah. And the more people I talk about them, this is not uncommon, right? This is something where lots of folks are dealing with and struggling with. So,
right. Well,
really,
the joke on my end is that compared to anything else I could specialize in psychology, this one's the most fun because everybody sleeps, and whether it's a disorder and a serious problem or something odd happened, it's an interesting conversation, and it's always, I find I can always help people learn something or get a little bit better at what they're doing, and sometimes a whole lot better. So yeah, it's a lot of fun on my end too.
Well, I've learned a lot, and I hope the audience can learn a lot too as we go through these questions today. Right. So let's start off with some basics, and I know the answer to this is not really basic. It's a really bigger, and you could probably spend an hour on this question alone. But can you get to the how and why we sleep?
Sure. And, you know, sometimes when I go to universities or colleges to speak about sleep and I say, well, how much time are you going to give me? And they say, well, how much time do you need? And I say, no, I taught a class on this for a whole semester and we had plenty that we didn't cover. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's just sleep. So yes, this is a big question and I will hit some highlights. What we sleep because our bodies and brains require it. So sleep is a drive and it's a need for us to stay alive and to stay healthy. That's it in a nutshell. There's the short answer. The long answer is in studies of mice and rats, if they keep a mouse or a rat alive long enough without sleep, they die. They have a heart attack and die. Now, they don't do research like that on humans, thank goodness. So that they've never proven that with humans. But when people try to keep themselves awake long enough, for as long as they can, they will often begin to have cardiovascular issues and a lot of other issues. But it's not safe to stay awake for too long without sleep. And by that, I mean days and days at a time. Beyond that, every organ of your body, every part of your brain is improved functioning through sleep and decreases in functioning with limited sleep. So there's no part of how we function as humans, from your respiratory system to your thinking, cognition, to your ability to handle emotions and deal with daily life, that doesn't get better with healthy sleep and doesn't get worse with poor sleep. Things we're now able to say that depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempts are all correlated with bad sleep or worse sleep. So the worse your sleep gets, the worse those aspects of your mental health get, and the more likely you are to experience them. So obviously we could go on and on about that. There's a lot of great research out there, but that's kind of the nutshell answer.
So we've had this conversation, and I heard you talk about this. I had 7 hours of sleep last night. So how does that rate in regards to how much sleep I actually need?
All right. So assuming you're a middle-aged adult male, right?
Yep.
Okay. So it's pretty good. Based on the averages for adults in America, the average these days is somewhere just above 6 hours of sleep, where 20, 25, 30 years ago, the average for adults in America was closer to 7.5 hours of sleep. So the trend is in the wrong direction for us and our health. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see so many more mental health and health problems these days. Obviously, it's not the whole cause, but it's definitely a piece of the pie that goes into what makes people unhealthy. However, if you want to get enough sleep that's going to recover you and recover your immune system and help your body, ward off colds and flus and help you avoid things like cancer and stroke and dementia, you should probably be getting more like 7.5 to 8+ hours of sleep a night. That's what science and what testing in labs shows kind of again and again and again. If you want to be functioning at your optimum, a little bit more than 8 hours of sleep every night is probably what you need to function at your absolute best all the time. And most people don't do that, but can we get by with less? Absolutely. But you're certainly not functioning at your best when you get less than that.
Is there such thing as too much sleep?
This one, I have been getting this question a little bit more often lately, and there have been articles that have come out that say, basically they say too much sleep is just as bad as not enough sleep. And here's what they're saying, and I'll talk you through this because it's a little misleading. There are these fabulous, gigantic research databases, mostly in Scandinavia, where they track health records for the population over decades of people's lives. So it's rich trove of data. And what they're able to show then is, if you get, let's say, 5 hours of sleep or less per night, if you average that over decades, you're much more likely to die younger than if you get 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. And on the other end of that same scale, if you're getting 9 to 10 hours a night or more of sleep, what they found is that you are also more likely to have a shorter life than if you're getting 7 to 8 hours of night sleep. Now, what they forget to put into the headlines or forget to write because it's not as eye-grabbing is that if you're sleeping 10 hours a night or more, there's almost certainly a reason you're sleeping 10 hours a night or more, and it's probably a medical problem or a sleep disorder. So for instance, if you have sleep apnea or narcolepsy, it's easy for you to sleep 10 hours a night, but your sleep is terrible. So if you have sleep apnea, the likelihood that you're eventually going to die of a heart attack or a stroke goes way up. And it's because you're not breathing several, maybe hundreds of times a night, puts a lot of stress on your heart. If you have narcolepsy, your sleep is bad and it can lead to other problems, but it mostly just makes you tired during the day. But if you have chronic pain, if you're in dialysis, if you have any number of medical problems, it can make your sleep weak, poor, how the quality is poor and the ability to maintain the cycles that you want is weak, meaning that your sleep isn't refreshing and recovering, so your body needs more of it to get what it wants. So you sleep more, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily getting what you need. And it may mean that you're more likely to die younger because of those other reasons. You have a chronic back problem, or you're incapacitated with a head injury or whatever it is. It's usually a secondary reason, or actually a primary reason for you sleeping 10 hours or more that looks like maybe it's because of the sleep, but it's not. If you look scratch under the surface, what you find is another problem that's causing the sleep to be that long.
And does the quality of our sleep or the requirements for sleep change as we age?
Yes and no. So yes, in that when you bring home a newborn baby from the hospital, they'll probably sleep 15 to 18 and some even 20 hours per 24-hour period. And that's the only time in your life when you sleep that much. And that's healthy and that's normal. Over the course of childhood, toddler years, and even into grade school, the need for sleep is still really large, and it's bigger than at any other time in your life, up to 12, 13 hours, pretty much through the toddler years, and into grade school, 9, 10 hours. When you get into adolescence, there's still a need for 9 to 10 hours of sleep a night. And late adolescence, it's still 8 to 9 hours per night. And I always shock college students when I say, if you want to perform at your best all the time, you should be getting about 9 hours of sleep per night. And I think I've met one college student in 20 years who gets about 9 hours of sleep a night, healthfully, good sleep, not sleep disordered sleep. So it's not common, but that's how you maximize your brain power. Once you've hit 25 years old, the next rest of your life, so 60 to however many years you get, the average is somewhere between 7 hours and 30 or 45, up to 8 hours and 15 minutes. That's probably how much sleep you need. Not everybody gets that. Most people don't, in the United States at least. Then the reason the answer is no is that a lot of people think that as we age and into our 60s and 70s and 80s, we actually need less sleep than we used to. And that the answer is probably yes, but not as much as you think. It's probably about 10 to 15 minutes less than you used to need. But it's very hard to parse that out, because the older we get, the worse we get at maintaining sleep over a long period of time. So the easier it is to wake up, the harder it is to get long, deep sleep, the way we did when we were younger, especially as a young adult. And the more medical and chronic pain and medications that we take as we get older. And all of those things are things that impact your ability to maintain sleep over the course of a night. So that was a little bit longer of an answer than maybe you wanted.
No, that was fantastic. No, I just remember my grandparents sleeping very little and feeling energized. And I thought, oh, as you get older, right, maybe intuitive, you're not as lively, and so you require less sleep. But I wasn't considering that.
They probably were also taking naps. So my grandparents would wake up at 5 in the morning. They'd be up, ready to go, and then somewhere around 11 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, nap, and then they take another nap at 5 or 6, and it's hard for them to stay up late.
So this is a great question. So my wife is from Chile, and there's a culture in Chile of taking afternoon naps, like they do in Italy and Spain and some other European countries. What is there about? Is that a good thing, or are naps good or bad?
I love this. I get this question a lot too. So the short answer is, whatever you want me to say about naps, it's probably true. They are great. They can also be a major problem. In general, I love naps, and I encourage naps, and I think they're the best and the healthiest thing you can do to maintain your focus during the day and regain your focus. It's a lot like rebooting your computer, where it just sort of shuts everything down, cleans it out a little bit, and turns you right back on, and you're ready to go. The ways it can be a problem is if you nap too late in the day, and that makes it harder for you to fall asleep that night. That's the biggest one. And that's probably the main reason that I recommend to my clients who are struggling with sleep or insomnia, that if you're going to take a nap, take it early. And the other side of it is how it can be a problem is if, for a lot of people, if you take a nap, there's this period called Reverie after you wake up from the nap that for some people is 5-10 minutes, maybe half an hour. For some people, it's an hour or two, meaning I can't quite wake up. I'm awake and I'm up and I'm around, and maybe I'm trying to do my work, but my head is a cloud. I can't fight through it. So that's a big issue. And it usually relates to just how sleep deprived you are, but there's other factors that go into that as well. And it's a little bit just how you're built. So if you're the kind of person who needs 10 minutes to clear your Reverie cloud out and you're good to go, congratulations. If it takes you 2 hours, that's something to be really thoughtful about with when you're planning to take a nap. If you need to be somewhere and doing something and on in less than that amount of time, there's no real way to guarantee that you can get through it faster than that. So that's something to think about. But on the whole, naps are amazing. They're more effective than caffeine for alerting your brain and making you more effective. And the next question that you might have, because most people ask, is, well, how long should the nap be?
Yeah.
And that's generally decided by how short your nap can be, with the result of you feeling refreshed and awake afterwards. So if you're one of those lucky people who can take a 5 or 10 minute nap, and then 5 or 10 minutes later you feel great, but congratulations, again, you won the lottery. If you need 20 or 40 minutes, take 20 or 40 minutes. If you need an hour or two, you have to think more carefully about when you're going to take your nap and what kind of planning you need to have ahead of time so that you're sure you wake up and you're sure that you're ready to go. So the shortest nap you can take to feel good is the nap that's best for you.
Gotcha. So you talked about the impact of sleep deprivation, and certainly, as you pointed out, college students generally fall short of generally accepted recommendations for sleep. So what are some of the implications for sleep deprivation on college students, and how might that guide our practice, particularly in student affairs?
Yeah, great question. And I've actually been consulting with some people around this, so I have some ideas. So first, the implications they're huge, and we could spend an hour talking about that. But in a nutshell, the first thing, and I talk about this with the student health director here, the first thing that you'll notice is semester starts, it's August or January or whatever, and everyone's doing their thing and out and about and having fun and doing all the things they've been waiting to do when they got back to college. And it's about 3 to 5 weeks later that there suddenly is this huge hit of colds and viruses and maybe even the flu starting. And that's, in my mind, as the sleep guy, if you get too little sleep for 3 or 4 weeks, that amount of time with a diminished immune system is just enough of a window to start catching colds and spreading colds and developing those kind of problems that come with, easily caught viruses on a college campus where everybody's, living in close quarters. So the first thing medically is it's just a lot easier to catch a cold, to get sick, and to go down for longer with a cold. You fight things off more slowly when your immune system is weaker. When you're getting enough sleep, your immune system is stronger because the biggest boost to your immune system happens during deep sleep. You don't get that during the day. And if you only get 5 or 6 hours a night, you don't have as much time for that immune system to build back up. So just from a health perspective, there's that. From a mental health perspective, and here at the Counseling Center, what we talk about when we talk to clients is, if you're getting 5 or 6 hours a night, you're increasing your risk for depression, increasing your risk for anxiety, increasing the chances that you're going to have thoughts about suicide and wanting to hurt yourself or kill yourself. All of those things are just, we are now able to say through research, more likely. You're making your brain less capable of managing emotion that happens normally during the course of the day. You get worse at it as you get more and more tired. So when clients come in and talk to me about their sleep and how exhausted they are, one of the things they almost always say is that they're irritable, or my boyfriend or my girlfriend is really frustrated with me because I'm picking on them, or I'm fighting or whatever, and we never used to do that. And once they get their sleep back on track, that's one of the first things that goes away. They no longer notice that I'm not as frustrated as I used to be all the time. So just that is another huge piece socially. It makes a big difference to people's life day to day. And then there's the academic piece where, when you're not sleeping well, or when you're not getting enough sleep, you are putting yourself at risk for not remembering the things that you were studying. It puts you at risk for a very limited experience of taking in information in a lecture, and particularly in a group project. You're not as able to interact as well or capture what people are saying. And I say all of this, and I also have to caveat with, these differences are slight enough that people don't notice themselves doing it. So even if all your friends are noticing, you may not be aware that this is different for you than it was 2 weeks ago. It's sort of a human condition that we tend to think that whatever we're going through right now is sort of normal to us. So that's just kind of built into who we are. So on a college campus, the changes that we look for, that we hope for from student life, are things that encourage bedtimes and encourage people to respect sleep. So one of the first ones that we bump into all the time is professors who make papers due at midnight. That's sort of the norm. There's no reason a paper has to be due at midnight. How about 7 o'clock in the evening? How about 5 o'clock? How about at the end of class period, or class period plus an hour? Sunday night at midnight, papers due is a great way to encourage students to finish their paper at 11:55. So if you make it due at 7 p.m., it's a lot more likely that they're going to be done with it at 6:55 and then have the evening to sort of get themselves put together or finish other homework, but not absolutely stay up until midnight. Another one that we talk about with Res Life is changing lighting in residence halls and the hallways after 11 o'clock, after 12 o'clock. It's whatever. Anything's better than bright lights all night long. So when students get up to go to the bathroom or brush their teeth or whatever, they're not hit with this big burst of fluorescent lighting at midnight. They get something a little bit dimmer that's still plenty bright enough to see and get around in, but also is encouraging the idea that, hey, it's it's not the middle of the day anymore. It's nighttime, and this is when humans go to sleep. We're working on other ideas, but sort of that midnight pancake feed or the 3 a.m. pancakes and coffee all night long during finals, those are the things we're trying to discourage and move away from.
So how about, certainly in my line in student centers, we're often encouraged to do late night programming in the effort to keep students, to give them an alternative to drinking or partying late at night.
Absolutely.
So what's the sweet spot for late night programs?
Right. And the truth is that young adults who are the target for those activities, they tend to go to bed biologically. They get tired a little bit later than the rest of us, more in the sort of 11:30 to 1:30 a.m. is when they get tired as compared to me and you. Yeah. I'm just guessing, Tony. But it's also biological. So I'm totally in support of those late night activities. But those are usually Friday nights and Saturday nights when most students are up a little bit later anyway. If they're wrapping up at, 12:31 in the morning, that's great with me. I mean, I don't expect most college students to be on a Friday night in bed before midnight anyway. So to have a safe alternative where they're not drinking and they're not going to parties and getting themselves into situations they shouldn't be in or don't want to be in, that's a much better situation. And, alcohol, we can talk about alcohol too, but it has impacts on sleep as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about it.
All right, let's go there.
Lots of people think that alcohol helps them get to sleep.
Oh, my mother-in-law was just saying, "Hey, I found this new trick. I have a couple of beers before bed." Like, well, yeah. So the thing about alcohol is, it's a central nervous system depressant. So it helps you fall asleep. The problem is that after you fall asleep, it doesn't help you. It actually makes things worse, to the extent where, and the more you drink, so anyone who's listening to this, who's ever had more than 2 or 3 alcoholic beverages in a night, and the closer you drink them to bedtime, the more you'll know what I'm talking about, where you can go to bed and you fall asleep pretty quickly, but somewhere in about 4 or 5 hours later, and it's usually pretty close to 4, you're either awake and using the bathroom, or you're just maybe not fully awake, but you're not sleeping well. And what's happening is the toxins from the alcohol are getting processed in your liver, and the activity that's going on down there is just not helpful for restful sleep. So you get a not so bad first cycle of sleep, and the second cycle isn't great, but it's okay. And then after that, it's kind of a wash. So the second half of your night, if you sleep 8 hours after you've been drinking, the second half of your night is kind of washed out. You don't get good deep sleep. You don't get good REM. And mostly what you're getting are the transitional stages of the stage 1 and stage 2, which, as I like to say, they're kind of like the bus ride to Disneyland. They're not. Disneyland is deep sleep and REM, and the early stages are really just traveling to get there. They don't give your body much. They don't help much. They're necessary, but when you drink, what you're doing is you're just getting the bus ride. You're not getting the good stuff at the end of the ride. And that's true for a lot of medications, but alcohol does it in a way that's a lot more common for most people and a lot more understandable because they see it or they live it. So, just saying, well, yeah, I'm going to drink a lot, but then I'm going to sleep 10 or 11 hours. Doesn't really work that way. I mean, your body just can't do sleep well when it's been drinking. So
in line with alcohol being used to help people perceive it, that it helps them sleep, let's talk on the flip side about caffeine. I was really blown away at some of the statistics that you shared. And I've been trying to educate people about the differences in coffee types and caffeine levels. So can you talk about caffeine? How does it actually function in regards to waking us up, and maybe share some of that, the differences?
So, I came in my life late to caffeine. I didn't start drinking it until grad school, which is not uncommon for my age group. But these days, people start drinking caffeine when they're usually in high school and sometimes middle school. And when I bump into issues with caffeine with my clients, the thing that I keep bumping up against is people not knowing how much caffeine they're drinking and not understanding the timing and how long it lasts in their system. So that's mostly what I focus on when I talk to groups. The way it works, the way caffeine works in your brain is that it looks just like this other neurochemical called adenosine. So your brain creates this thing called adenosine that's just there all the time. And the later in the day, the more of it there is of adenosine. And adenosine's whole job is to tell your brain, hey, let's relax. Let's just cool down for a little while. And it's a mild thing. It's not heavy. But, you know, once it's almost bedtime, you've got a whole lot of it. So it's got a strong message. During the course of the whole day, it's around. So what caffeine does by looking exactly like it is that when it goes into your brain, it fills the neuron receptor. And instead of that receptor getting the message, hey, relax, it gets no message. So caffeine doesn't actually wake you up or make you more energetic. What it does is it blocks the message to relax. And it keeps doing that for about 4 to 6 hours. So 5-hour energy gets its name from how long does caffeine last? About 5 hours. So for about 5 hours, it's doing its job and it's holding off the adenosine. And then when that wears off and it starts to fade out, you've got all this built up adenosine just sort of lining the walls around those neuron endings and hops in there and starts to send that message loud and clear. And that's the caffeine crash. So the caffeine crash is caused by caffeine wearing off and all that stored up, hey, relax message hitting all the buttons at the same time. So you don't get more energy from caffeine, you get less relaxation from caffeine, and it lasts about 5 hours. That's the half-life. So after that, it gets weaker. It's still around for another 4 or 5 hours, but it gets weaker over that time. So and you're right. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know that you have these stats off the top of your head, but I was blown away at the differences even between like a Wawa and a Dunkin' Donuts, yeah, and how much was in a Red Bull energy drink.
Right. So I do, because I've talked about it enough. I know the numbers. So with an energy drink, what you'll find is it's about 10 milligrams per ounce. So the little old Red Bull cans that were 8 ounces had about 80 milligrams. The newer ones that are 16 ounces have about 160 milligrams of caffeine. The little energy shot, like a 5-hour energy, is about 200 milligrams per shot. And then, so those are all regulated by the FDA. So that's why I can say, it's about 10 milligrams or this or whatever. They're very consistent because someone's monitoring that. But coffee has been around, for 1,000 years or something. And the FDA doesn't regulate things like that. So what you find with coffee is everything. And usually the coffee you make at home, and even in a Keurig or a K-Cup or whatever, is probably around 100, probably between 80 and 120 milligrams per cup. And when I say cup, I'm usually talking about a 12 to 16 ounce cup. If you go to a gas station or McDonald's or a place that doesn't specialize in coffee, usually you're going to get between 100 and 150 milligrams of caffeine in that cup. Like a 16-ounce cup of coffee at McDonald's is 145 milligrams. They publish that on their website. But when you get to specialty places that mostly focus on coffee, like Dunkin' Donuts, Peet's Coffee, I forget the one that's all over Canada right now, but all over Canada.
Wawa's my choice.
And well, if you're from here, you're drinking Wawa coffee because we're from here. When you step it up into the categories of we really take pride in our coffee, you're going to see more caffeine. And a place like Dunkin' Donuts has a 16-ounce cup of coffee with 300 milligrams of caffeine in it. And Starbucks turns it up even a little bit more than that. 330 milligrams for a 16-ounce cup. So, yeah.
Wow. So a Dunkin' Donuts cup of coffee is like 4 of the old style Red Bulls almost.
Yeah, right. Think about it that way. Exactly. And then Starbucks is a little bit more than that. So my favorite is to do presentations where parents and their teenagers are all in the audience, and I get to have the teenagers say, you know, yeah, my parents always yell at me for all this Monster Energy or whatever I'm drinking. And then I say, well, look, they're drinking twice as much caffeine in their 1 cup of coffee as you're having all day in your little Monster Energy drink. And what's worse? So, you know, at the end of the day, the issue here for my clients is don't drink it too close to bed, and don't drink too much, because it'll make you like, whoa, way too over caffeinated, and then you'll have this big crash. It's also an issue for your heart. Anybody who has a heart problem should be aware of what they're drinking as far as caffeine goes. You don't want to drink too much. And FDA and the Mayo Clinic says 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine in a 2 to 3 hour period is enough, and don't go over that. And 400 milligrams a day is what they recommend as a limit for an adult. And the AAP, the American Association of Pediatrics, recommends no caffeine for children, not even a Coke. So it's pretty clear medically that this stuff is, we're sort of misusing caffeine all the time.
Doesn't like chocolate have caffeine?
Yeah, and you see that, like chocolate and some pain relievers and migraine kind of medications. Chocolate has a little, and tea has a little, but in my world, they don't compare. So I strongly encourage my clients who are dealing with sleep, no chocolate before bed, no chocolate in the last couple of hours before bed. But if you have some chocolate at 6 o'clock, you have a candy bar, you know, we're talking in the 15 to 40 milligram realm. It's nowhere near the amounts we've been talking about. It doesn't help you fall asleep, but it certainly isn't horrible compared to drinking a Red Bull 2 hours before bed.
So you talked about the effects of alcohol and caffeine. How about other, again, perceived remedies such as melatonin and sedative drugs like Ambien? Right. Is it giving you the same kind of helpful sleep? Actually, maybe you can separate melatonin and Ambien, Ambien-like drugs out for us.
For sure. Yeah, they're very different. So I'm happy to talk about both of them. And I guess let me start with Ambien, because that's the most popular, one of the most popular medications in the United States right now is Ambien. When it came out in, I guess this was the early 90s, it was designed for short-term sleep solution to help people with insomnia, this sort of intermittent or brief insomnia, to get through whatever they were getting through. And it's still really good at that. And that's still one of the best things there is out there for a brief, sort of intermittent, brief insomnia. What changed is a few years later, once people weren't dying from it, it's one of the ways the FDA makes these decisions, is they approved it for longer term use. And right now there are lots and lots and lots of Americans who take Ambien for long-term use for months or years at a time. And that's more concerning because there isn't much data or research on long-term effects, because it takes years of research to find out what the long-term effects are of years of use. So what we're beginning to find out now is that there seems to be a correlation between long-term Ambien use and things like cancer and things like heart attacks. And one of the reasons they think that might be the case, for at least for heart attacks and dementia, is that Ambien is it's a benzodiazepine receptor medication, and it affects your heart in a way that just relaxes it a little bit. And if you struggle with anything like sleep apnea, that can increase the likelihood that you have an apneic event where you stop breathing while you're sleeping. A little bit of that is normal, but if you have that already and it's maybe a little bit more than a little, and then you take Ambien, it can make it a little bit more than that, and that can lead to problems like stroke and heart attack. So now we're starting to have enough time and years to be able to research people who've taken something like Ambien for a long term, and we're getting a lot more information that it's probably not the best thing to take long term. It certainly isn't. There are other options from the pharmaceutical realm. Trazodone is a very popular one that is not a benzodiazepine kind of medication, and it's very mild, and it doesn't seem to have nearly the side effects that something like Ambien does. Another big side effect of Ambien is something called automatic behaviors, which look often like sleepwalking. People call people on the phone. Automatic behaviors just means doing something that you usually do during the day without doing much thinking. This is something that an Ambien can encourage. So you are asleep, but you're up and maybe you're cooking, or you're up and you're calling your boss, or you're up and you're typing on your computer. Some people drive their cars. I had a client who drove to 7-Eleven, bought cigarettes, came home, smoked cigarettes in bed, and then fell asleep and went back to sleep. But he was asleep the whole time and only knew any of this happened because of the receipt he had from 7-Eleven and the cigarette butts next to his bed. Wow. So that's incredibly dangerous. It's not most people who take Ambien. It's a small subgroup. But if anybody who's listening to this who says, oh, that sounds like me or my friend, tell them this is a real problem and it's very dangerous and you can't predict when it's going to happen again. And it's not the medication for them, and there are other options. So that's another Ambien issue as well. I bump into that with some frequency just talking to people here who aren't even walking in the door to ask about Ambien.
Yeah.
So it's good. There are other things that also work pretty well. It's not great. It's best used for a short-term remedy for short-term insomnia. With melatonin, I talk a lot about melatonin to groups because every group I talk to, several people have used it. No one knows what dose to take. No one knows when to take their dose. And most people don't understand how it works. And when I tell them that, skunks and possums and coyotes and foxes, who are all nocturnal, have the same dose of melatonin released in their brains as we do at the exact same time, they perk up and they're like, what do you mean? Those nocturnal animals are waking up when the sun goes down and we're starting to get ready for bed. And then I explained, well, that's because melatonin itself doesn't make you sleepy. It's really just sort of an alarm bell that says the sun's down. And if you're nocturnal, that sets off a set of neurochemical signals that wake you up. And if you're like us and you go to sleep at night, it sets off a series of signals that help you relax and fall asleep. So it doesn't make you fall asleep itself. The biggest thing I bump into, though, is that people are taking massive doses of melatonin in hopes that it's going to help them fall asleep. And there's nice research that shows the highest dose that you need to get the most increases and improvements in falling asleep faster doesn't get better with more melatonin. So if you're taking 0.3 milligrams, that's the highest dose that's the most you need to decrease the amount of time it takes you to fall asleep, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You can keep increasing that dose, but this amount of minutes stays the same. So I'm bumping into people taking 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams. I just met 2 people in the last 3 months who take 40 milligrams a night, and the recommended dose is 0.3 milligrams. And the problem with taking too much is not death or it's not like that. It's a naturally occurring hormone in your brain, but it can make you very groggy and feel like you have kind of a hangover the next day because your body's still experiencing melatonin, even though it's 10 o'clock in the morning. And it's not to be taken right before bed. It's to be taken a couple of hours or 3 hours before bed, because that's how much time your brain gets with melatonin after the sun goes down before it's time for bed.
So I just traveled out to California. Is it helpful for jet lag, for instance?
It's actually better for jet lag than it is for insomnia. So it's the best use of it is for people who do shift work or people who are traveling through time zones. And there's a jet lag website, something about a rooster. It's like the Happy Rooster or something. That might have been a restaurant I just ate at, but something about a rooster that will help you. You plug in where you're traveling to, where you're traveling from, and it will tell you what time of day to take the dose of melatonin and what time to stop taking those doses of melatonin when you get there, and vice versa when you return from your trip, as well as when to get in bright light and when to avoid caffeine and things like that. So it's very effective. And the doses are higher for jet lag, but we're still only talking like a 3 milligram or a 5 milligram dose. That's as high as is recommended for things like this.
It sounds like it seems like last decade or two, there's this culture of more is better, right? So vitamin C, everyone's like, oh, vitamin C help ward off cold. So I'm just going to take, 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C. I don't know what the recommended dose is, but I remember the big chewables and chowing down on them, right?
Yeah. So if you're at the store and you want melatonin and you see a 1 milligram, a 5 milligram, and a 10 milligram, most people are going to reach for the 10 because, well, I really have problems sleeping, so why not take the bigger dose? But that's not really the way it works for this stuff. Yeah. So
those are some remedies that people can take. I've heard you talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT-I. Can you talk about that and how that might be an alternative to some of these?
Yeah, and actually the Medical College of America, I'm getting that wrong, but there's a big publication for physicians that has made it clear that the primary treatment for insomnia is not medication or Ambien, it's actually CBT-I. So cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is the first line of treatment as recommended by physicians and psychologists. And mostly it's pretty simple and very understandable until you get deep into what that treatment is. And, it starts off with some very basic things like making sure your sleep hygiene is good and making sure your bedroom environment is a good one for sleep, and making sure you have the right cognitions, the right way of thinking about sleep, that even if I get a bad night tonight, it's not going to ruin my life. I'm going to be okay. I'd like to do better, but let's see what I can do tonight. And then it works at the end, at the last pieces of CBT-I are things like sleep restriction and stimulus control for insomnia, where you're limiting your time in bed in all day. So for college students, for instance, if you live in a residence hall and all you have is your bedroom and a bed and one chair that may be really uncomfortable, it's getting that college student out of the bed when they're doing homework and eating and checking their phone and watching movies and talking to their friends, having them do all that stuff outside of bed so that when they do go to bed, their body knows, oh, this is where we sleep. We're not about to eat or check Facebook or Twitter or whatever. So there's that, and that sounds easy, but it's a lot harder than it sounds, especially if that's your only bedroom space. And beyond that, it's restricting the amount of time you spend in bed so that when you do get to bed, you use your body and your brain use that effectively and efficiently for sleep. And again, sounds really easy. It's really hard. On the other hand, it's the most effective treatment there is for getting over insomnia. It's what I use with clients who are trying to get off of taking Ambien for 5 years. It's what I use with clients who've been really depressed or really anxious for years and need a way to get better at sleep. And it's never fun. But what's amazing is usually in 2 weeks working with me, they're noticing that their sleep may not be longer, but it's much better. It's much more refreshing, and they can tell that the quality is a lot better. They're getting deeper sleep, and they're able to use that time better. So that's a peek into CBT-I.
Well, it's funny what you said is being okay with not having a good night's sleep. So I guess there's this anxiety cycle, right? Like you lie awake thinking, oh, this is going to impact me. And
absolutely. That's one of the main features. I mean, it's one of the symptoms of insomnia, or this type of insomnia that we're talking about, is, you know, the closer it gets to bedtime as the evening goes on, the more stressed or anxious a person's getting about what's going to happen tonight. You know, when they wake up, they might not be worried about that, but the closer to bedtime it gets, the more they're concerned and worried and upset about being able to fall asleep and having a good night or a bad night.
so if I wake up at 4 in the morning and I'm up for 10 or 15 minutes and I'm struggling, I'm starting to feel that anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Do I continue to try to sleep, or do I get up?
15 to 20 minutes is enough time to say, you know, I think I need to get out of bed, especially if you're someone who has that happen with some frequency. You get out of bed, you go sit in a comfy chair or sit on the floor, and you do something quiet and not that exciting, to be honest. So for people our age, I say, you know, get an old catalog or an old magazine that you have laying around and just flip through that, or do some deep breathing, fold some laundry, things like that aren't that exciting. You've looked at this magazine before, it's not going to thrill you, or you can't wait to read something. For college students, it's usually more about deep breathing or stretching, or doing a mindfulness exercise, mostly because they don't have catalogs laying around for the most part, or old magazines, because they read everything on their phones. But staying off of phones and iPads and computers is important to helping people get back to sleep. And then you do that for about 30 minutes, and then you try and go back to bed and try again after that.
Got it. So you've talked about CBT-I. Do you have other general tips, strategies on how we can improve sleep?
You know, the tried and true one these days is to turn off your devices an hour before bed. If people really push me on, oh, but I have to, then okay, at least half an hour before bed, you should have things turned off for airplane mode or whatever, so that you're not distracted. You're not getting all that interesting and exciting information from your phone, or your computer or laptop or TV. That's a big one these days in particular. And, you know, I have a very few clients who've just sort of given their phone up. 8 o'clock at night, it's away, it's in a drawer and whatever, and they can't believe how much it changes their life for the better. They feel great, and their sleep gets better, but they also feel so much calmer by the time they go to bed. It's just hard to let your brain turn itself down over the course of an evening when you have a phone in front of you and can check things and see things and get messages all the time. Our brains aren't really built for that, and sleep in particular gets hit by that. Beyond that, you know, you probably know what works well for you, and you've tried a lot of things. If you have problems with sleep, you've probably tried more than most. And my guess is, if you've read some of the things that are helpful with sleep, you know what they are, and you may have tried them but not found them that useful. I always encourage people, you know, you need to try and hold the line for at least 2 or 3 weeks before you decide whether or not that's going to work for you. It's not a one-night process. It takes a little time to change these kind of behaviors.
So I've heard you talk about the value of meditation, and I don't know that it's a meditative exercise, but I forget the technique. It's the
yeah,
pledge,
right.
pledge.
So,
and I've tried that, and it's been super helpful for me.
Oh, good. Wow, you're a testimonial right here. It's called Serial Fives, which is a terrible name because no one remembers it. But basically, it's taking a song or a phrase or just something you know all the words to, and saying each word 5 times, and then the next one, and the next. So I pledge, allegiance. And you get to the end, and you start over, or you do a new song, or maybe it's the Star Spangled Banner. And the reason that that's helpful, and it's better than counting sheep, is because, I mean, it's essentially a forced mindfulness where you have to be thinking about something, but at the same time, it's really not interesting. So if your brain is engaged and busy, but it's bored, so that plus you're sleepy, the general equation ends in falling asleep. So just like going to class and you're at a boring lecture, and if you're tired and you're at a boring lecture, you probably are falling asleep or it's hard to stay awake. That's the same idea here. So saying the same word over each 5 times and then the next word and the next word, it sort of recreates that system of, you have something to do and it's not interesting. And if you're sleepy, pretty likely you're going to start falling asleep pretty soon.
Great. So I want to be respectful of your time. We're nearing the end of our hour here. Are there any additional resources, conferences, books, videos that you might recommend to allow folks to continue to explore some of the content that you covered here today?
Yeah, there are so many. I'll give you 3 and 1 of each. How about that?
Yeah.
2 books that I really like. One is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. I've been handing that out at when I do talks these days. Just came out last year. He's great. It's sort of a science-y book for what's the whole point of sleep and what kind of an impact does it have. It's amazing. But in the CBT-I realm, there's a great book called, Colleen Carney wrote it. And it's, I think, called Turn Off Your Mind and Get Some Sleep. It's on Amazon. It's a paperback. It's designed for people trying to help themselves get better sleep. And it shows you the whole CBT-I process. She does a great job. She does a ton of training around it, and she's really good at it. As far as like things to watch, there's a National Geographic, I'm gonna say it was a show. I think it was 2 hours. It's about 3 years ago. And it's just called Sleep or the Science of Sleep. I can't remember anymore. And it's beautiful, like National Geographic things are, and it's really well researched and really well explained. Can't do much better than that. And be careful about other things you sort of bump into on YouTube. It's not all true and it's not all real. But generally speaking, if you're looking at a good resource like Harvard or Stanford, University of Pennsylvania has a great sleep center there. You're going to find a lot of really good information on good sites like that.
Well, you and I have talked about it. You are so good at these presentations, and I know you've done this on a national level. I hope someday you'll sit down and write a book.
All right.
Because as I researched it, I'm like, there isn't a whole lot out there, and you were so good at it. Totally captured the intrigued the audience and got people engaged. So
awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm on my 48th page of the book that I'm working on, and it's focusing on college students and sleep. So I'm at it.
Love it.
I'll give you the first copy.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Brad, for sharing your time and wisdom with us today. As always, thanks to our program sponsors. I'll be back again next month with an episode featuring Susan Comaves, Gavin Henning, and Lauren Dean as they discuss the impact of CAS standards, which many of you know, college advancement standards, and a celebration of their 10th edition publication. You can receive reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the HigherEdLive newsletter. You can also browse the archives at HigherEdLive.com or subscribe to our iTunes podcast to tune into podcasts like this and share this with other folks that might be interested. I'm Tony Duty. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you make it a great week, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.